Join me today as we talk a little bit about moral complexity in Star Wars. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name's Bobbie, and we're going to talk a little bit about moral complexity in Star Wars. More specifically, is it actually viable? And so what I mean by this is there room for morally gray things in Star Wars? And this, to some people, you're like, well, that's a silly question. Of course there is. To others, are like, that's a silly question. Of course there isn't, which is why we're going to talk about it here. So, why would that be a silly question in either direction? Mainly because the same reason, both ways, actually. Kind of. So, the big issue is that there's the Force, the light side and the dark side. And these are literally fundamental forces of nature in Star Wars. Okay, in the real world, in our universe, there is gravity, electromagnetism, weak nuclear force, and strong nuclear force. These are the four fundamental forces of nature that hold everything together, essentially, that create reality. And in Star Wars, there's two more: good and evil, the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. They are every bit as real as gravity and have every bit of an impact, every bit as much of an impact as gravity. Okay? They permeate the Star Wars universe. They're in the rock, the trees, all things. It surrounds us, it binds us, and everything else Yoda said in The Empire Strikes Back to Luke to try to make a point. So, you have to take that into account. And that is why some people will be like, well, you can't have moral complexity because you literally have good and evil as foundational forces in the setting, which also firmly plants it in the fantasy realm, um, which essentially means that the good guys have to win. And so you have that aspect, but in my opinion, yes, you can have moral complexity. It's a matter of how you go about doing it and who it's focused on. Because the good evil thing, that's the Jedi and the Sith. Okay, those are Force users. That's not Han Solo. That's not the Mandalorian. That's not Jabba the Hutt. It's not Jango Fett or Boba Fett. That's not the clones, unless one of them spontaneously has the Force. So in the non-Force using characters, or the non-Jedi and Sith, I should say, yes, you can have moral complexity. You should have moral complexity. That's one of the things that makes Andor and Rogue One interesting. Rogue One, it didn't take it as far as it could, but whenever you have Jen Erso, basically calling out Cassian because he intended on shooting her father because he thought this was, the thing for the greater good. Ultimately, he didn't. But at the same time, the rebellion still killed him. She still had a point that, stormtroopers didn't kill her dad. The Empire didn't kill her dad. It was the rebellion. Now, the rebellion didn't do it on purpose. They weren't Andor was supposed to do it on purpose, but the X-Wing pilots weren't like, oh, there's Galen Erso, proton torpedo, which is total overkill, by the way. And also should have killed every single person up there on that platform. The X-Wings don't drop a flashbang. They don't drop grenades. They drop ordnance that's supposed to, take out chunks of a Star Destroyer. Okay? That's one of the few things about the movie that I think they definitely got wrong. And you have a similar problem in Ahsoka, where they're riding along and turbo lasers are hitting within feet of them. If a turbo laser hits within 50 feet of you, you're dead. You will be vaporized. Just the energy output of those things is massive. You cannot have one of them hit 2 feet away from you. This is the Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando problem, essentially, where Arnold will take a grenade and throw it and kill like 20 guys. He'll kill a guy that's 10 feet away from the grenade. A grenade will blow up within 5 feet of him. He gets a little, he's hit in the side, but he's fine. He's not thrown 50 feet, doesn't have a concussion, doesn't have shrapnel all in his body. Like, he got a little hit in the side. He's a little hurt, so he's a little wounded whenever he fights Bennett later on, but still strong enough to throw a steam pipe through his chest. Let off some steam, Bennett. My terrible Arnold impression. But anyway, I'm going a little far afield there. But if you look at Andor, there's tremendous moral complexity there, especially in Stellan Skarsgård character. I believe his name is Luthen. I should really rewatch that series because it was really good. There he gives this monologue towards the end of the series. I think it's in like episode 10 or 11. He has a guy on the inside. He's a spy inside the ISB, and he wants out. And he hits Luthen with like, "What have you sacrificed?" And Luthen just launches into this. It was probably like the pinnacle monologue for Star Wars. And I'm saying this as someone that's like the Lucas trilogy and for the most part the prequels for decades. This was peak writing. This is whoever wrote this needs to write the rest of the damn shows Disney's making. And if somehow this person also wrote like The Acolyte or something, then whatever they were on whenever they wrote Andor, they need to be on it all the time, or whatever they were on whenever they're writing The Acolyte, they should never touch it ever again, whichever way it goes. But it's spectacular, and if you haven't seen it, you should look it up. Maybe I'll link to it if I can find it down in the description. But essentially he tells the guy like, I've given up. He builds towards it, he tells him, he's like, what have I given up? It's like friendship, kindness, any hope of a relationship. He's like, I know ultimately this is going to kill me. He's like, I am going to suffer the consequences of what I decided I was going to do decades ago to fight the Empire. And no one's ever going to know I existed. I'm never going to receive any acknowledgement. I'm never going to have an intellectual peer to discuss any of this with. And, it's all going to be thankless. And it's all going to be to create a brighter future that I'm never going to see. He's like, I've made my mind a sunless place. He's like, I have to use the tools of my enemy that I despise to have any hope of defeating them. And he's like, what have I given up? Everything. And just the conviction, just everything he throws at that. Stellan Skarsgård's a great actor, but Skarsgård is a great actor, and but no, it just shows that like there's your moral complexity. He knows he will have to do evil things, he will have to do disreputable things, and he's going to do all this, but he's going to do all this in the service of good because the Empire is ultimately the greater evil. But he knows that what he has to do is evil, is irredeemable, that it makes him evil, but it's the only hope of actually defeating this vast galaxy-spanning organization. And you even see it play out. Like he specifically lets certain people walk right into a trap, and basically tells Saw Gerrera, well, maybe you shouldn't go in on this one, Saw. And I think, if I recall correctly, like I said, it's been, Saw Gerrera, realized what he was saying ultimately, and that he was willing to sacrifice these other people purely to keep someone on the inside because they were worth more to him than those other people were. It's a simple equation. And, he had the will and the moral flexibility to do it because what he's ultimately doing is for good, but he's willing to do tremendously evil things if that's what's necessary. And that's where your moral complexity comes in from Star Wars, or Orlando in the original trilogy. He doesn't like the Empire, and Han is his friend, but he has other people he has to watch out for. He has to make the calculated choice of, well, the Empire is here and now. This is no longer a hypothetical. If if I don't go along with this, they're going to kill me. They're going to kill other people here. They're going to take over. They're going to crush any spirit of independence this place has. And the only thing standing between that and, that not happening is turning over my friend. And, yeah, so he chooses the greater good. Now, since we like the heroes, we're all like, oh, God, Lando, we can't believe you betrayed him like that. But if you take a step back, you're like, I think a lot of people would have done what Lando did, and I can't fault them for doing it because he's in a no-win situation. It's easy to sit back and say, oh, he should have stood for what's right. Well, is what's right saving one person or saving potentially, I don't know how many people live on Cloud City, but I'm sure it's a lot. Vader could have just been like, well, you're not going to turn him over. All right, let's go back to the Star Destroyer and just blast this place to atoms. Like, no one was going to stop him, So what was Lando's real move there? And then obviously once the deal turned south, Lando switched sides and then spends the next movie, or at least part of it, trying to make amends for what he did because he knows he screwed up. And I know he screwed his friend. I wouldn't say he's necessarily screwed up because, again, push comes to shove. What are you really going to do in that situation? So, yeah. So you got things like that. You have. It's not well. I was going to say Luke and Vader, but there's not really moral complexity there. That's more a matter of Luke betting on him being right about his father. Although I suppose there is the complexity to it of if he's wrong, the Empire is going to crush the rebellion and they're going to win. So I guess it is kind of a moral moment of, do I really believe this? Is this really worth the risk? Because he's the last of the Jedi at that point. He hasn't passed on his training to anybody. And if he fails, that's probably the ball game. So, it's there. Han has to make a moral decision at one point. He has his money. He can leave. He can go pay back Jabba the Hutt. He can be rid of these problems and go on with his life. He's gotten by okay into the Empire. So, but he sees these people. He sees that they're doing something for the greater good. Something that can really strike a blow against an organization that he knows is evil. And so, instead of saving himself, he jumps into a combat situation to save Luke so he can make the shot. I mean, Han could have died doing that very easily. The defenses of the Death Star could have easily taken him out. More TIE fighters could have taken him out. Vader could have circled around and taken him out. Hell, the exploding Death Star could have taken him out. He risked all of that, knowing that if he survived, he's going to be a hunted man. But he made that choice. But he was pressed with the dilemma first, And so, yes, Star Wars can definitely do moral complexity. You just have to understand that you can't do it so much with the Jedi and the Sith. Because the Jedi are agents of good. If they start to do evil things, they cease to be Jedi. Now they can walk around with all the trappings of a Jedi. They've got the robe, they've got the lightsaber, they call themselves a Jedi, but they're breaking the Jedi code. They are no longer a Jedi. They just pretending to be a Jedi. Now at that point, sure, they can do all kinds of morally questionable things, but it's not a Jedi doing morally questionable things. It's a former Jedi doing morally questionable things. This is where the Acolyte fell apart, okay? Because it tried to go with the idea of, oh, well, they're just human. They would do these things. Well, no, they're not human. They're not just human. They're superhuman, okay? And they have direct access to a fundamental force of the universe that is subtly guiding them to do the right thing, and they are doing the wrong thing. They're going against that. They're going against the Jedi code. They're lying to their other council members and other Jedi members. Almost everyone involved should be, in any circumstance, should be a fallen Jedi. At which point, then they can do all the morally questionable things they want because they're no longer part of the Jedi organization. And the Sith, they're the opposite number. The Sith can do good, but generally it's in the service of some greater evil. Okay? Because the Sith have embraced the dark side. They're not just fallen Jedi. They're not just dark side Force users. It's specifically the Sith. They worship evil. They embrace evil. Okay, it's not just, oh, well, they've got a different way of doing things. No, no, they have the evil way of doing things. Everything they do is in service to evil. Okay, the Sith, similar to the Jedi, are essentially a religion. Okay, and the one can't exist without the other, essentially, because it's the contrast. Kind of like, there's all kinds of words in English that you can't really explain it without its opposite. Like, how do you explain the concept of wet if someone doesn't explain the concept of dry? They're opposites. They exist together. One can't exist without the other. Dry has no meaning if wet isn't possible. Okay? Wet has no meaning if dry isn't possible. And so, light and dark, hot and cold, things like this. And that's what the Jedi and the Sith are. That's even though the Jedi think the Sith are gone, that's why they should have known they were wrong. But it's one of many reasons they should have known they were wrong. And so it's in the other characters, the characters outside of those boundaries. And then you have the Jedi and the Sith react to them, try to provoke them, try to bring them into their fold, et cetera, et cetera. They can be known factors in the universe, but everyone else is still in morally gray land. And you can even have, your gray Jedi, your morally flexible Force users. They just won't be Jedi and Sith. Or if they do so repeatedly, they won't be. And so that's where you have to draw the line. And I think some people want them to break that. And I think that would be a tremendous mistake, because that's just how the fundamentals of the Star Wars universe are. The Jedi are good. The Sith are evil. That's that. If there's a member of either group claiming to be otherwise, doing otherwise, then they are not following the code of that group. They're not really part of that group. They're just saying they are. And again, you can do a lot with that. Again, using the Acolyte here. The story could have been, how do these characters that found themselves in a terrible situation, things just went wrong in all kinds of ways, then they covered it up. See, the things going wrong, that's not the problem. It's the then they covered it up part, because now they're lying. And maybe the rest of the show is, maybe some of them keep following that path because the dark side is seductive. And not in the Smilo Ren way, although apparently that works too now. But it's seductive because it provides power, and once you've crossed that moral event horizon, then there's nothing really stopping you from keep going. That's why Yoda and Obi-Wan tried to explain to Luke that Vader was beyond redemption, because they didn't think there is any way that he was redeemable, because once you start going down that path, you just want more and more and more. It's seductive, but it's addictive. When you get to the point where your power is increasing, and all of a sudden you can just make your problems go away just by using the Force and destroying them, that you become the hammer and all your problems become nails, as in how the expression, when you're a hammer, all your problems look like nails, is the expression. So kind of transposing that into Star Wars lore here. And so the show could have been how some of them are starting to go that way, and the others realize they've done something wrong and are trying to atone for it. And it all comes to a head whenever, if I were writing it, it would all come to a head whenever the ones who are trying to atone have to basically go before the council and be like, hey, look, we screwed up. We've been lying to you. This happened on this, back in with the witch coven and everything. And these other Jedi were involved. They have clearly lost the plot. Exile us from the Order if you have to, but they have to be stopped. And, presumably this act of atonement would help them on their path of redemption. And, to illustrate that Yoda was being an absolutist, I have my own theories about that, that I occasionally throw out there, but I'm not going to right now. Uh, I suppose I could. I honestly think that Yoda and Obi-Wan, that there was a level of bitterness to what they were doing. They were bitter that Anakin destroyed everything they stood for. And it wasn't just a matter of we have to destroy the Sith. It was also a matter of, no, even if Anakin is redeemable, we're not going to try because he doesn't deserve to be redeemed. And I genuinely think there's a level of that to that, because otherwise they'd be right and Luke would be wrong. But Luke is trying to tell them, no, he's my father. There's still something in there of him. It's not just Darth Vader. It's not just the Sith Lord. And then once you factor in the prequels and you realize that Anakin did everything he did because he loved Padme. Now, I've seen people say that, well, it bordered on obsession. He couldn't let her go, this, that, and the other. Like, whatever. I think these people have never been in love. Like, love makes you do crazy things. It's the way it is. It's not a rational thought process at all. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm protective of the things I love, or like to believe I am anyway. And if I knew that I was going to lose them and I thought there was a way to save them, I would probably do some pretty damn irrational things too. So once you factor that in and you realize that he did the wrong things, but part of it was for the right reasons. Now, there was other things going on. There was other factors, but that was a huge part of it. And so when you realize that, you realize that that person, that redemption is possible. It might not be probable, but it's possible. And so, that's where I think, I don't know if Yoda, like I said, that's me thinking Yoda and Obi-Wan are essentially cranky old men who are pissed off at Anakin for what he did, given into very human emotions. And so, because the Jedi aren't emotionless robots, they very much have emotions. It's just what happens when they express them, kind of like the Vulcans, except the Vulcans take it way too far. But the Vulcans do it because the Vulcans have stronger emotions than humans do. That's what people don't understand that don't watch enough Star Trek. They force themselves to become cold, emotionless robots because they had massive wars against each other, and it nearly wiped them out. So, with the Jedi, they have emotions, and I would argue that part of Luke redeeming Vader also proved that emotions aren't the problem, because without them, Luke would not have been able to redeem Vader. Luke would have just charged in and tried to fight him because he's a Sith Lord, and lost. Because he would either lose to Vader, because Vader wouldn't hold back, or he would lose to the Emperor because he was wildly outmatched. And so one way or the other, he would have lost. Then the rebellion would lose, and that would be that. It was emotions that saved everybody. And which is one of the big reasons why I severely dislike the sequel trilogy. And also the whole turn with Grogu in, was it the Book of Boba Fett episode? Because it's implied that Luke is essentially trying to rebuild the Jedi Order the way they were, when he knows for a fact they failed. He even says that in that stupid Last Jedi movie. He even tells Rey that no, the Jedi were blinded, that Darth Sidious took over the Senate and everything. So they clearly failed. So something went wrong. And the fact that the only two Jedi he met up to that point were like, hey, your dad can't be redeemed, you should kill him. And then he redeems him and he kills the Emperor. Should have told him, maybe this whole no attachments thing, maybe that's part of the problem. And so in the EU, post Return of the Jedi, yeah, there you can start to get into some moral complexity with the Jedi on a few topics. There can be the debate internally of, are attachments good or bad? Because, yeah, attachments do potentially lead to the dark side. Because, again, it's emotions. People do crazy things because of emotions. But without them, how do you connect to the greater universe? That's part of why the Jedi fell. Because they became this impersonal pseudo police force centered on Coruscant. Whereas if you look at like Knights of the Old Republic, there's temples on other planets. The Jedi they're spread out. They're not centralized under one group. And as such, they have more of a connection to the local people. They know them. They get to, they become ingrained in that society. So they can feel when bad things are happening. They feel it on that level. And so they fight it. And so that's, again, the EU kind of makes this a lot more clear than the old EU. Makes this a lot more clear why this all matters. And it ties into something that's called, what the hell is it called? It has something to do with broken windows policy. And essentially, the idea is greater evil has a beginning somewhere. It's only allowed after all kinds of other things have happened and could have been stopped at any point along the way. Had you just, like, if you got a neighborhood, some windows get broken, oh, that's just vandals. No, that's criminal activity. That needs to be put down. Because the next thing will be spray paint. The next thing is this. And then the next thing you know, you've got a drug gang that's shooting the place up. And that's all because at various steps along the way, criminality was seen as permissible. And that's how the Sith came to power 1,000 years after Darth Bane. Because they developed a system, the rule of two, but the other part of the plan was the Sith were wildly wealthy. Okay? And so they used this money to buy influence, to gain people to their side, but also to fund basically terroristic activities throughout the galaxy and secessionist movements and things like this, so that the Jedi were constantly off balance, constantly trying to put out the small fires, and they didn't see the bigger one that was building. And because the Sith were able to start so many small fires, the Jedi couldn't put them all out. And so it just allows bigger and deeper and more awful things to become permissible until finally you get to the full-on the CIS, the separatist movement, which is precipitated by the Trade Federation thinking they can just take a planet. And you see how this is permeated even in the movies itself. Like, think about the Senate scene. The Trade Federation has a representative in the Senate. Not some planet the Trade Federation has. Those weren't the representatives from Cato Nemoidia, the Neomodian homeworld. That was a representative for the Trade Federation. A company had a senator, had a delegation, and a killer space pope hat too, by the way. But the Neomodians, their headdress is on point. That's about the only thing the acolyte got right. So and it was good to see them in there too. I'll acknowledge that. So that just shows you the level of corruption that has to occur. That would be like, not to get political here and for current U.S. politics or anything, but that would be like Boeing or Exxon or, I don't know, Disney to just have a seat in the U.S. Senate. Like, that would just be so, that's just the concept of that is so preposterous, because we all know they just rent and or buy senators instead. But to have them actually have a representative there, like just the things that would have to happen between now and that becoming legitimized, I can't even imagine what chain of events that'd be. But that would just have to be corruption beyond belief, which all starts with permitting lesser corruption. Because once one thing's permissible, well, is the next thing? Someone's going to try it. And if it is, then someone's going to try the next thing, and so on and so on. And so the Jedi, by centralizing on Coruscant, they missed out on a lot of that, and it, allowed the dark side to take hold. So, but yeah, so I think I've went wildly off the beaten path in the whole moral complexity thing in Star Wars. But that's where you do it, is on the ground, is with the characters that aren't Force users. or that aren't part of the Jedi and the Sith. Because again, you can have the gray Jedi types. You can have unaligned Force users. If they would have stuck with the old EU, you could always have the Imperial Knights, who were there's the Imperial Remnant. That's what's left of the Empire, essentially. They still control, I don't know, it's something like a fifth of the galaxy. It's a notable chunk. It's built out in the unknown regions. Thrawn built a bunch of it, and so part of the membership of Chiss. Um, and then but they have a new emperor who is the descendant of Baron Suntir, I think is his name, Fell, and his son. I believe the implication is that his son ended up having, or they might have outright stated, I believe his son ended up having a child with Jaina Solo. So their child and the rest of their line are Force sensitive. So he's a Force user. And then there are the Imperial Knights, and since they're the Empire and they know they got to have Force users, they're not going to be foolish like the Empire of old and just have the two at the top and the Inquisitors. So they are loyal to the Empire first and foremost. They're not loyal to the Jedi. They're not loyal to the Sith. They're not loyal to good or evil. They're loyal to the Empire. So they're morally flexible because they've got to do what the Empire demands, not what good or evil demand. And you can have things like that. You can do things like that, and that would be great to see. And instead, what we get are Jedi lying for the stupidest reasons imaginable because nothing they did on the Witch Planet is inexcusable. It was all just, consequences of some bad decisions. That's it. Nothing was actually an evil act. So there was no reason to lie to the council. But they did. And so then from that point forward, they all feel guilt over it. Well, what happens when you start feeling guilt in Star Wars? Guess which direction you start going. So anyway, ultimately, half hour later here, yes, moral complexity is possible in Star Wars. You just have to know where to use it and who can use it. You can't foist it onto the Jedi and the Sith. It does not apply to them. They have chosen their side. And so you've got to work around that. That's perfectly doable. Again, look at Andor and Rogue One. But anyway, that's about all I've got to say on the topic. Sorry for the massive diversion into some things in the movies there that you probably talk with Jim about someday. But yeah, that's how I feel on the matter. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Am I off my rocker here? Should the Star Wars universe modernize and embrace that the Jedi and the Sith can be morally complex, or overly so, and all just shades of the gray slurry that these people want everything to be, or should it maintain its roots? This should be like Dungeons and Dragons, where demons and devils are evil, people from the upper planes are good, and because they're literally made of the substance of those planes, which are good and evil. Like they don't have any choice in the matter. But anyway, it's a Dungeons and Dragons thing. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Commenting and sharing are the things that really help us expand our reach with the videos, and we appreciate everyone that does so. Actually, I appreciate you just watching up to this point. Thank you for sticking around if you did. And if you cut it earlier, well, sorry to see you go. But anyway, that's about all I got to say. So just remember, the Force will be with you always.